It's driven by the inability of free market to build housing, the inability of free market to develop housing in areas where they can't. It's property taxes, which are about a third of housing
Obviously,
costs.
Housing is a supply and demand situation.
It's the largest contributor to cost of living.
But there is way more demand in blue states than there is in red states.
CNN's Abby Phillip recently hosted a heated panel discussion featuring conservative commentators Joe Belli and Scott Jennings, alongside other political analysts. The exchange highlighted the growing tensions in political discourse as the panel tackled today's most divisive issues. In this video, we'll break down the key moments from this contentious debate, analyze the arguments presented, and examine what this conversation reveals about the current state of political commentary. Let's dive into the most compelling exchanges and see what unfolded.
A tale of two economies, one that's working wonders for the wealthy and the other where middle and lower Americans are struggling this holiday season. Starting with the good news from this week, though. According to the Commerce Department, the U.S. economy expanded at its fastest pace in 2 years, with GDP surging in the third quarter of 2025 to 4.3%. Then comes the bad news for Donald Trump. Much of that growth came from government spending and from wealthy Americans. And less than 2 hours after the GDP report was released, another report showed that consumer confidence is declining substantially this month, the lowest since April. This week's mixed bag follows the worst unemployment numbers in 4 years. Trump is claiming victory, as he often does. He says that this is all due to tariffs. But I definitely think that this indicates a resilience in parts of the economy, but also warning signs in others. Is it too early for Trump to say that this is just an unequivocal victory and that tariffs are responsible for what we're seeing in this report?
Let's be specific about tariffs. The GDP number was driven by an 8.8% growth in exports. Right? That is fundamentally attributable to tariffs. That was a big part of it. It's not just government spending. But how can we talk about something as a mixed bag when you have inflation going down, job numbers going up, and the economic growth of beating the estimate by a full percentage point? That's not a mixed bag. That's a full-out win for Donald Trump in his first year in office. It's a justification of Republican governance. It's a justification of President Trump's policies. And, I'm sorry that not every American is feeling it right now, but going into 2026, you'll see some of the tariffs work themselves out. We'll have new trade deals. You'll see the implications of the big, beautiful bill actually play out in the tax returns in the first quarter of 2026. You're going to see a great economy for Americans, and that's when you'll see Americans at every level feeling it.
I would respectfully disagree with my fellow New Yorker. Look, it's a mixed economy at best for President Trump. The wages are slow. The affordability challenges from coast to coast, it's increasing. It was said earlier by Abby, it's the highest unemployment in 4 years. And by the way, we just had the Trump shutdown, the longest government shutdown in history.
Trump
by the way,
shutdown?
it is the Trump shutdown. That's what most Americans blame it on. So look,
Which party voted to shut down the government? Which
it's
party?
simply not
Your party.
It's simply not a good economic outlook for President Trump. And one of the final things I'll say is that Republicans love to rail on former President Biden. But at this point, 4 years ago, President Biden's approval ratings are actually higher than Donald Trump's are today. It's not looking good for President Trump.
Scott, I'm going to give you a lot of credit for interjecting even while your voice
Trump
makes you sound like the Grim Reaper. But go ahead, Scott.
Democrats voting to shut down the government 15 times and finally had to come to their senses. Look, Joe's right. Trump's got good numbers. Everything is moving towards what they predicted, that the economy is going to boom because of low taxes, because of the regulatory changes they've made. So right now, it looks pretty good. They need wage growth to outstrip inflation, and they're getting there on that too. So, they have predicted this boom. If it does happen and it continues on, they're going to have something to sell in the midterm.
Well, to your point about wage growth, it did show that inflation-adjusted disposable income was flat. And also, I think as we put this into perspective, right, these numbers put the Trump economy roughly on par with where the Biden economy was last year. That's true on GDP growth. It's true on inflation. So, sure, this is good for Trump because the alternative, a downturn, would be worse. But it also is not outstripping the performance that Trump himself said as he was running for office last year was dismal for the American people. I mean, it's actually, when you look at the numbers, he is performing about where Biden was a year ago.
And this sounds almost like the Biden re-election campaign. Remember when Joe Biden was saying that, the numbers are great and don't believe what you feel, and Republicans were saying, that it's not about what the numbers are, it's about how people feel. And so J.D. Vance disagrees. He said that affordability is an issue. He spoke, so I guess the Republicans, you guys need to kind of get on messaging, because one, you're saying it's great, and then J.D. Vance is saying that affordability is an issue, because of course he's planning to run, for the next president of the United States. So I think it's just important for everybody to agree that there is some affordability issues. And more importantly, with health care reform. I'm looking forward to seeing what that's going to look like in January.
I think Republicans should jump into the pool full cannonball on affordability.
Yeah.
You know why? Because, University of California, Berkeley, not exactly known for its conservative leaning.
Before we continue with the panel exchange, let's examine Scott Jennings' economic argument more closely. Jennings predicts a potential economic boom from tax cuts and deregulation, though he himself qualifies this with, if it happens. This raises an important question worth exploring. What does economic history actually tell us about boom and bust cycles? Historically, periods of rapid growth following deregulation and tax cuts have often been followed by significant economic contractions. We've seen this pattern repeat across multiple administrations. Here's the accountability issue. Right now, commentators across the political spectrum are debating whether the current economic conditions, high costs of living, employment concerns, will improve under these policies. But when we look ahead to the 2026 midterms, will these same analysts revisit their predictions? If a boom occurs followed by a bust, will commentators acknowledge the full cycle? Or will we see a familiar pattern where one party inherits economic challenges, attempts recovery, and the cycle begins again? This is the conversation we need to have. One based on historical patterns and measurable outcomes, not just optimistic projections. Let's see what happens next in the discussion.
They had a study out this year that talked about affordability in red states versus blue states. The first thing Americans should actually ask themselves when they're struggling with affordability is, who is in charge of my state? Is it Democrats or Republicans? On housing and utilities, the two biggest drivers of affordability, University of California, Berkeley says red states are 50% less high cost of living.
Why would that be, Joe? Could it be because blue states have large population centers where
it's per capita?
But could it be because in blue states, some of the largest cities in America where cost of living is higher? I don't care where you are in the world.
I'm glad you asked, because the study answered.
I'm asking you, yeah.
I'm glad you asked. It's driven by nonsensical climate policies. It's driven by the inability of free market to build housing. The inability of free market to develop housing in areas where they can't. It's property taxes, which are about a third of housing
Obviously,
costs.
Housing is a supply and demand situation.
It's the largest contributor to cost of living.
But there is way more demand in blue states than there is in red states. And look, I'm not.
You're saying there's more demand in blue states where people are actually leaving, and less demand in red states like Tennessee, Florida, where people are moving to?
It's actually not. I'm not disputing what the study says. What I'm saying is that I'm not sure you can make that a political statement. I'm just saying that there are some structural differences between a red state like Alabama and a blue state like New York. And one of the biggest structural differences is that Birmingham and New York City are not the same kind of city. New York City is not just expensive because of climate policy. It is expensive because millions of people live here. That's why.
The cost of producing
it's also housing.
I'm not saying this. I didn't make it political. University of California, Berkeley made it political. They actually compared Republican-governed states versus Democratic-governed states.
Listen, Democrats probably need to address how they address the housing supply issue, right? Regulation does play a role. However, even with all of those things, your urban centers all around the globe are more expensive than less urban centers. So just from a basic...
Red states have urban centers. Miami, Houston, Dallas.
Okay.
I mean, you can go through the list. There's a lot of urban centers in red states.
Yeah, I understand that.
Those
but the
are
biggest
lower
ones
cost
are where?
of living. Those are lower cost of living. In this country, obviously, is Chicago, New York, and LA.
All right.
But number 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are actually all in blue
American
states.
public, where we are right now is, and I do think that let's set the table for Trump. He has an opportunity to take this and perhaps improve upon it, right? to get into 2026 with a better economy than he left 2025 with. But he's also pushing the Supreme Court to double down on tariffs, double down on tariffs that are a mixed bag in terms of the economy. In terms of GDP, it actually can help boost the numbers because there's less input coming into the economy, so that helps. But it doesn't help in terms of what it costs for people to actually live, which might be why we're seeing voters saying that they think Trump is responsible for the current economy. They say that they disapprove of how he's handling the economy because they don't care about the inflows and outflows of the broader economy. They care about the inflows and outflows of their pocketbook.
Absolutely. So the silver lining here for President Trump is that the only reason his economic numbers right now are mixed at best for him and not an absolute disaster is because he actually reversed course on some of this tariff policy, or he delayed a lot of this tariff policy. A lot of this was a completely unforced error by President Trump earlier in the spring. Maybe he is actually this unwitting genius and he managed expectations to be so low for him. But tariff policy is one of the reasons why there was a very pessimistic outlook. And look, fundamentally, we can all sit at this table and agree to disagree on a number of these topics. But in November 2024, President Trump, the most disciplined version of President Trump's campaign, said, if you vote for me, the cost of living is going to go down.
Day one.
Egg prices are going to go down. Gas prices are going to go down.
They did.
And look what happened.
They
A
did.
lot of consumer prices have actually gone up.
Not eggs,
including
not gas.
electricity.
Eggs and gas.
In New Jersey, the Democrats won a massive landslide earlier this year because Mikey Sherrill campaigned on electricity rates. It's gone so high in New Jersey, just as it has gone high in Virginia, New York, and places across the country. President Trump, it is mixed at best for him.
And earlier this week, I mean, we were talking about the windmills, which would affect places like Virginia where they're trying to add to the power grid. Trump is saying, okay, get rid of windmill energy just because I don't like windmills. A lot of this economic policy is just driven by what he thinks works, whether or not that's actually true, whether it's because he doesn't like windmills because they look bad, or he likes tariffs because he thinks that foreign countries are paying those tariffs, which they are not.
You guys spend a lot of time on windmills. I actually caught that. There's a lot of time on it. And that's kind of confusing because are we for climate change or not? Is he for climate change or not? Because that ties into the windmill.
I like windmills. I don't necessarily like the subsidies that it costs to operate windmills competitively, generating kilowatt hours as compared to nuclear, as compared to hydraulic power, et cetera. That's the problem that Republicans have with it. Not that we don't want more things spinning in the ocean generating power. I think we would love that if we can make them affordable and actually generate power at a good cost.
Next for us.
Abby Phillip raised an important point about housing costs in blue states. Many contain major metropolitan areas like New York, LA, and San Francisco, where demand naturally drives up prices. Joe Belli countered by focusing on building restrictions. But here's where the debate gets interesting. There's a fundamental tension in the conservative housing argument. On one hand, there's advocacy for loosening construction regulations to increase supply. On the other hand, President Trump recently stated his opposition to large-scale home construction, citing concerns about protecting existing homeowners' property values, particularly baby boomers who've built wealth through home equity. This creates a policy contradiction. How do you increase affordable housing supply without affecting existing home values? Basic market economics suggests you can't have both. There's also the question of alternative solutions that haven't been widely discussed in this debate. Since the pandemic, remote work has left many commercial buildings underutilized. Converting these spaces into residential housing has been proposed as one potential solution, though large-scale implementation remains limited. The real question is, can free market principles alone solve the housing affordability crisis, or does this require more comprehensive policy intervention? What's your take on this housing debate? Do supply-side solutions work, or do we need a different approach? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you found this analysis helpful, hit that like button and subscribe for more political breakdowns.